Welcome to WhiskyCast, cask strength conversation featuring news and interviews from the world of whiskey. I'm Mark Gillespie, and this is episode number 1099 for March 9th, 2025. Coming up in a few minutes.
Sometimes when you're here and you're in the day-to-day and you're focused on, okay, we've got to make this blend and how are we going to achieve, this, that, and the other with what I have to work with. But to see that other side of it that I don't get to see and have that consumer-facing opportunity is just really enlightening. It really reminds me why I do what I do and why I love what I do.
Tara Lindley is the Director of Sensory Analysis and New Product Development for Constellation Brands. She's based at High West Distillery in Utah, and her latest project is the 2025 release of Bourye, High West's blend of Bourbon and Rye whiskies. More with Tara Lindley later on WhiskyCast In-Depth. I'll also have the What I'm Tasting This Week department, Behind the Label, and much more. The news is next on this week's WhiskyCast.
The second release in Dewar's four-part collector series, Dewar's Double Double 38-Year-Old, is now available. It's a tribute to the Scottish Highlands, and it's like nothing you've had before. More in a minute.
Let's get started with the week's news. It's brought to you by the Dalmore. The on-again, off-again issue of trade tariffs took center stage this week. On Tuesday, President Donald Trump revived his 25% tariffs on almost all imports from Canada and Mexico, only to walk them back partially 2 days later. Now the tariffs will only apply to goods not covered by the U.S.-Mexico-Canada Free Trade Agreement, and whiskeys do fall under that agreement. It's just another 30-day temporary reprieve, though, and that was not enough to stop Canada from implementing its own 25% tariffs on bourbon and other American whiskeys, along with $30 billion in imported goods. Those tariffs may be a moot point, though, as many Canadian provinces pulled American whiskeys off their provincial liquor store shelves. Brown-Forman CEO Lawson Whiting met with analysts after the company's earnings report this week and addressed the situation in Canada.
They removed basically American, not just beverage alcohol, but a lot of American-made products have come off the shelves in Canada, which is tough. I mean, that's worse than a tariff because it's literally taking your sales away. Completely removing our products from the shelves, that's a very disproportionate response to a 25% tariff. So frustrating, and we're going to continue to try to fight for getting, as I said just a minute ago, these reciprocal to zero for zero tariffs is the best thing for our industry as a whole. And we're going to see how that all plays out. Now, Canada's not a massive company for Brown-Forman; it's around 1% of our sales. So. We can withstand, and it's disappointing that some of our consumers aren't going to be able to get our bottles of Jack Daniel's up there because it's a big brand in Canada and popular, but we will see how this plays out.
Canadian sales only account for about 1% of Brown-Forman's annual sales. Those sales were up by 6% during the third quarter of the company's fiscal year, led by Jack Daniel's and Woodford Reserve. However, organic sales for the fiscal year so far remain down 1%. Campari Group CEO Simon Hunt says tariffs could cost his company up to 100 million euros in 2025, depending on what happens with U.S.-European relations. The impact on North America is estimated at 30 to 35 million euros. Campari reported a 2.4% increase in organic sales during 2024. Oversupply issues are forcing Irish distillers to shut down production at the huge Middleton Distillery complex in Ireland. The shutdown will start next month and run through the normally scheduled maintenance shutdown in July. Master distiller Kevin O'Gorman told us in an email that production will recommence after that. Meanwhile, Diageo is shutting down its newest distillery in Lebanon, Kentucky, until July. The distillery had already met its production goals for the fiscal year. In other news, Compass Box is getting a new CEO. Former Diageo executive Nishat Gupta will take over for outgoing CEO Maurice Doyle. Gupta is currently CEO of Betty Buzz and Betty Booze, the drinks company founded by actor Blake Lively. UK regulators have cleared the way for Edrington's sale of the Famous Grouse and Naked Malt brands to William Grant & Sons. The sale was being reviewed for antitrust concerns and still remains to be closed. Bardstown Bourbon Company is restructuring its operations. The company's own brands will be combined with Green River Distillery's brands under the Lofted Spirits moniker, and the contract distilling business will be renamed Lofted Custom Spirits. No changes in executive management. Former Brown-Forman executive Mark McCallum has joined the board of Uncle Nearest Tennessee Whiskey. As president of Jack Daniel's, McCallum was in charge during the period when Uncle Nearest founder Fawn Weaver was researching Nearest Green's legacy and led the drive to update Brown-Forman's historical records to reflect Green's contributions. Let's talk about new releases now. Woodford Reserve has unveiled this year's Kentucky Derby bottle. The Derby 151 bottle features artwork by Louisville-based artist Humberto Lajera and will be available nationwide. Luxco's Penelope Bourbon has released its annual edition of Rio. It's finished in a combination of American honey and Brazilian Amburana oak barrels. It'll carry a recommended retail price of $79.99 a bottle. Meanwhile, Luxco's Remus Bourbon has released the first in a new series from MGP's Ross and Squibb Distillery. The Master Distiller Experimental Series No. 1 is an experimental whiskey matured for 9 years in Seguin Moreau barrels, seasoned for 24 months. It'll be available in 13 U.S. states with a recommended retail price of $79.99 a bottle. Gypsy Spirits is out with its fourth release. Whiskey Gypsy Tribute double-barreled is matured for 4 years, then proofed to bottling strength before being rebarreled into new charred oak casks. It's priced at $44.99 a bottle. I received a sample this week, and I'll have tasting notes for it soon at whiskycast.com. Jameson is out with a new travel retail release just in time for St. Patrick's Day. The Triple Marsala Cask Edition is a follow-up to the previous Malaga and Chestnut Cask Editions. It's matured in a combination of ex-bourbon barrels, Oloroso sherry, and Sicilian Marsala casks. It'll be priced at around $45 a bottle. Portland's Westward Whiskey has unveiled its first club release of the year in a collaboration with Fort George Brewing. It's finished in Fort George's Matrushka Stout casks and is priced at $99.99 a bottle for Westward Club members. Isla's Ardnaho Distillery has released its second core range single malt. Bolsa is matured primarily in Oloroso sherry casks and is priced at £65 a bottle. And Diageo is adding to its orphan barrel range with Fanged Pursuit. It's a 17-year-old Kentucky straight bourbon. The non-chill filtered bourbon is priced at $200 a bottle. And finally, congratulations to the folks at the Glasgow Distillery Company in Scotland. This week they marked the 10th anniversary of filling their first cask of whiskey. You can keep up with the latest whiskey news all week long at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app. The news is brought to you by the Dalmore.
Hello, Richard Patterson here, Master Distiller, Master Blender for the Dalmore. You know, whenever the team and I are in the world sharing our exceptional single malt, we like to keep in touch with Mark Gillespie and the latest news from WhiskyCast.
Let's check the calendar and see what's happening around the world of whiskey. The annual Drinkmonger Spirits Festival is this coming weekend in Edinburgh, Scotland. The Dornoch Castle Hotel in Dornoch, Scotland has a Glenallachie tasting on the 22nd. The Brandy Library in New York City has an exceptional Scotch Spirit School coming up on the 25th. Whiskey Live London is March 28th and 29th. The Newcastle Whiskey Festival is on the 29th in Newcastle, England, and Big Smoke Meets Whiskey Fest is that same night in Tampa. The New Jersey Whiskey Classic is on Thursday, April 3rd, and Malt in France is April 5th and 6th in Rennes, France. If you're organizing a whiskey event, please let us know about it. We'll add it to the calendars at whiskycast.com and in the WhiskyCast community app.
Dewar's Double Double 38-year-old is the second release in a 4-part limited edition collector series honoring Scotland's most legendary whiskey regions. This rare blended malt, a tribute to the Upper Scottish Highlands, is crafted from nearly 4-decade-old Highland and Islay whiskies. It undergoes Jura's unique 4-stage aging process with a final finish in Pedro Jimenez sherry casks from the prestigious Royal Brackla single malt. The finish invites you to explore your own tasting notes, but for me, there's incredible depth, with rich layers of vanilla, toasted cereals, dried figs, plums, dark chocolate, and a subtle hint of Islay smoke, all beautifully balanced. To truly elevate this tasting experience, renowned chef Gabriel Cruther, in collaboration with Jurors, has created an exclusive selection of custom chocolates. Crafted from the world's finest ingredients, each piece is infused with a few precious drops of Jura's Double 38-year-old whiskey, making this a luxurious and unforgettable pairing. Now available, this exquisite pairing of whiskey and chocolate promises to deliver an unforgettable experience. Please drink responsibly. Copyright 2024. Jurors is a trademark. Imported by John Dewar & Sons Company, Coral Gables, Florida. Blended Scotch whiskey, 48.8% alcohol by volume.
This week on WhiskyCast In-Depth, we're joined by Tara Lindley. She's the Director of Sensory Analysis and New Product Development for Constellation Brands, based at High West Distillery in Utah. Her background is in the wine industry, and she joined High West 9 years ago this week. Her latest project is the 2025 release of Bourye, High West's blend of Bourbons and Rye whiskies. We talked this week on a Zoom call. Let's first talk about the 2025 release of Bourye. This goes back a long way to the early days of High West, doesn't it?
Yes, from what I recall, I believe it was 2009 was the first release.
And David Perkins put that one together. It's a combination of bourbon and rye.
That's right.
What's unusual about this year's version?
So with this year, first of all, we're excited that we're going national with it again this year. So it's back out there outside of Utah. But secondly, we brought a little bit more rye spice forward. So every year that ratio of bourbon and rye changes. It's always a majority of bourbon and it's always a minimum 10-year-old spirit. But we like to play with that flavor profile a little bit, celebrate it like a vintage of wine. And, we added a little bit more rye this year to bring forward a little bit more rye spice that really balances out nicely with that rich, chewy bourbon character.
I had the chance to taste it, and I get the rye spice that you're talking about. What do you do to bring out the rye spice? Just add more into the mix, or what?
So yes, it can be as simple as thinking about it in terms of ratios. But even with that said, each lot year, in each mash bill of whiskey presents itself a little bit differently every year at whatever age it's at. We also have some of our own make High West rye in here. And so, it really is unique to each point in time that we're blending what that perfect ratio is when we want to bring forward the rye spice, or maybe we want to highlight the bourbon a little bit more in some other years.
And the bourbon comes from MGP in Kentucky and also a distillery in Kentucky, right?
That's correct. Yes.
Tell me how you got started doing sensory work. You come out of the wine trade, right?
That's correct. Yes. So yes, I had been in the wine industry for about 8 years, and it started off by just looking for wanting to move to a mountain area and where could I utilize those skills that I had learned in the wine industry, which at that time, I was an enologist. I did a lot of lab work, but sensory was a little part of it too. I learned from, the winemaker at Chateau Montelena there, doing sensory on wine. But, finding this posting for High West, while sensory was a component of it, it looked like there was a little bit more lab analysis involved as well. So I applied, and overall it worked out. Of course, I'm here. Tomorrow is actually my 9-year anniversary here with High West, and with that, coming into the role, and as we've grown, we were acquired by Constellation in late 2016. And having the ability to work on the spirits brands throughout the Constellation portfolio, and just having exposure to all different types of whiskey and spirits and tequila, and exposing myself to different whiskeys and understanding the different maturation characteristics of, different cooperages or different barrel treatment types. And so there's just a lot of exposure and a lot of experience and time that has gone into, I guess, my sensory background here.
How did you develop that background, though? How did you develop your nose?
So, when I came in and I was working in the lab, in my first weeks and months, it was a matter of, first of all, working very closely with our master distiller, Brendan Coyle, and learning from him and, learning how he described things and his vocabulary, just to, get my feet wet and kind of understand a little bit more. Cause I came from a wine background. I had, a wine lexicon in my head. And, so that was kind of the first piece of it. The second piece was just doing sensory myself on every single thing. So when we would be putting a new blend together, it was helpful for me to look at all the individual components first so that I could understand what we were working with and understand how those are going to play together. And so, understand everything from the perspective of, where it's at in its life cycle and how it changes from year to year. That one takes a little more time as well. And the new make and where it starts. And so it really is a time dependent factor, but the ability to make those connections in your head to be able to describe sensory is a very useful skill as well, which also takes time. But that's another thing. I'd say I'm still building that, and I always will be.
What's the difference between a wine lexicon and a whiskey lexicon?
Just some of the different flavors. There's a lot of overlap, but there are some different flavors. When you look at some of the wood character, a lot of times, I guess from my experience in wine, I saw a lot more French oak aged wine. And here with whiskey, we're looking at, American oak age. So there's some different attributes that come from different barrel types. In the wine industry, you get, a larger selection of fruit attributes than I would say we get with whiskey.
How can the average person develop that sensory vocabulary?
So what I think is really helpful is, you can go online and there's all kinds of whiskey lexicons. That's the wheel that has all the different flavors and aromas on it that you might experience from whiskey. And they make them for all different spirits. You can find a rum lexicon, you can find a tequila lexicon, whatever you're interested in. You can find one of those spirit wheels online. And I would find one that looks, approachable for you, print that out, and then go to taste that spirit. So in the case of whiskey, I would print out a whiskey lexicon and I would start by nosing it. And I would start by saying, okay, what are the fruit elements? What are the herbal elements? What are the spice elements? And start working through the different parts of the different categories on that whiskey wheel to see what I pick out on the nose and on the palate as I'm tasting something. And over time, you'll start to make those connections a little bit easier. When the word is presented in front of you as you're tasting or smelling, it triggers your brain to remember, oh, that's what that is. That's vanilla. Where it might be hard for you to come up and generate that word by yourself or without that trigger, just from your brain. But over time, that becomes easier and you develop that memory muscle to remember that's what vanilla smells like when I'm smelling that. So I would say it's, the repetition and the time, just putting in the time, making those connections with your brain and your nose and palate.
Do women make better nosers than men?
I think that women and men have different, there are some differences there. I don't know what they are, so to speak. I don't want to say that one is better than the other because we're all different and we're all different on any given day. It depends on what you ate last night or, maybe you, for example, today I drove through a snowstorm to get here. So I'm a little bit frazzled from my drive in. So, I think it's all a little situational on each day for each person.
And you could have a cold too.
Right. And in that case, we hope you're not doing sensory.
What do you do when you have a cold? Turn it over to somebody else?
Yes. Because if I can't smell it or I can't taste it, there's really, no valuable contributions I can make at that point in time. So we've got a trusted team here. I have colleagues and peers that I trust to sit in for me when I'm unable to.
How has it been blending in the High West owned distillate into these whiskeys?
We're so proud of that. And it was just a few years ago that we were able to incorporate the High West own make rye into Bourye, that we had some spirit that was, minimum 10-year-old that we could put in the blend, and it worked with the sensory profile. So, we're very proud of being able to use our own spirit. And, the difference is the majority of the spirit, actually all the spirit that we have sourced from other producers, is column still. So, much lighter, brighter ester profile. With our own make that comes off the pot still, you get a heavier, richer, nice complexity on that, on the ester profile and the congeners that come through on that spirit. So, we absolutely use it as a lever when we're making our blends and developing complexity in our blends. So it's, it was strategically made to use as that lever.
Was there a conscious decision to go with column or pot still?
The idea was that, we wanted to create a spirit that was different than what we could source on the open market. The majority of our spirit, as most everyone knows, comes from MGP. And so why would we create something so similar to that when we can just source more of that? Let's create another blending component that's going to help us drive interest and complexity in our blends, and something different and unique that we can be proud of.
And you bottle the rye by itself for Utah only, right?
We have the Bottled and Bond, which is our own make rye. And I believe that has been distributed nationally. And, we will continue releasing Bottled and Bond in the years to come.
What's the most fun part about working at a distillery?
Wow, there's a lot of fun here. So there's a lot of work too. So what I love, is the cadence of developing blends across a year. And so people often ask me, what's your favorite whiskey? And 10 times out of 10, I'm going to say, it's what I'm working on right now. Actually, I also really love double rye, but I also love, whatever project I'm working on. So right now we're working on the Prisoner's Share, which that's a little nugget for a release that we'll have later this year. And, so I'm really excited about how that's coming out. And, next we're going to work on our next Bottled and Bond release. And so, I'm getting amped up and we're looking at those components, and, that's getting really exciting to me. The other thing that I love about working at the distillery is that, one of my responsibilities that I get to do, I guess, is I get to go out into the market and work with some of our sales team and help, share and educate, consumers and, even, people who work at bars or people who are selling our product. I get to educate them on our product and taste them on it. And it's always so exciting to me to see how enthusiastic people are about our blends and how they love what we do. Because sometimes when you're here and you're in the day-to-day and you're focused on, okay, we've got to make this blend, and how are we going to achieve, this, that, and the other with what I have to work with. But to see that other side of it that I don't get to see and have that consumer facing opportunity is just really enlightening. And it really reminds me why I do what I do and why I love what I do.
Thanks to Tara Lindley for joining us on this week's WhiskyCast In-Depth. You'll find a link to the High West website in the show notes for this episode at whiskycast.com. Let's start off the What I'm Tasting This Week department with the 2025 High West Bourye. It's bottled at 46% ABV, and the nose has touches of apples, peaches, honey, and roasted almonds. The taste has notes of maple, salted caramel, oranges, cocoa, and a hint of ginger, and the finish is nice and long with a good balance of citrus and spice. I'm scoring the 2025 edition of High West's Bourye a 93. I mentioned the Frey Ranch Single Grain Series 100% barley whiskey last time around and received a sample of it this week. It's made with unmalted barley and bottled at 55% ABV. The nose has touches of barley sugar, peaches, honey, and vanilla, while the taste has a nice balance of cinnamon and black pepper with barley sugar and hints of citrus and vanilla. The finish, long and spicy with a hint of barley sugar, and I'm scoring the Frey Ranch 100% barley whiskey a 92. The Whiskey Ferry delivered an unusual whiskey this week from Liberty Pole Spirits in Washington, Pennsylvania. Their peated rye whiskey bottled at 55.7% ABV. The nose has a soft peatiness with touches of honey, rye spices, vanilla, and a hint of cocoa. The taste has notes of cocoa, peat smoke, baking spices, honey, and vanilla, and the finish is long and spicy with a touch of peat. Nice balance and complexity here. I'm scoring the Liberty Pole Spirits Peated Rye a 92. I'll be adding these whiskeys to our searchable list of nearly 3,900 different whiskeys from all over the world. Check it out this week at whiskycast.com. Let's open up the WhiskyCast community app now and see what people are talking about this week. As you might expect, the trade war is the number one topic of conversation. Canuck Sloth posted this from Saskatchewan. From a Canadian perspective, this goes far beyond a simple tariff war. On the alcohol front, the push from the majority of Canadians is to remove all U.S. booze from all shelves. To make it crystal clear, threatening to annex Canada is the number one reason USA booze is being removed from shelves, not the tariffs. As a Canadian, I do feel bad for the companies on both sides of the border, but at the end of the day, for many Canadians, including myself, boycotting U.S. spirits began the day Trump threatened Canada's sovereignty. HRC responded with this. To Canuck Sloth and our Canadian friends, I can say that I understand and support the Canadian response, especially to the tariffs and additional hyperbolic nonsense emanating from Washington, D.C. Recognize it may be a gesture of little value, but plan to go buy me some Alberta Premium or 40 Creek. One of our newer members, Whiskey Raven, posted this in the app the other day. Not sure if anyone else has this issue, but I believe my wife is tracking the growth of my whiskey inventory. Noel Harity responded with this comment. My wife tracks mine also and makes the odd comment like, where did that one come from? As long as she's not drinking them. And Alan Chanel added in, perhaps for some leverage for a hobby of her own. My wife is fine with my whiskey hobby, and I remain fine with all her gardening and landscape endeavors. And finally, Memphis Trumpet with this response to Alan, same here. When I learned how expensive gardening can be, I told her that I now understood why she didn't give me a hard time for my whiskey purchases. If you have a comment, question, or suggestion, download the free WhiskyCast community app from your app store and join the conversation. You can also find us on Blue Sky, X, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast, and the email address is comments@whiskycast.com. Let's close out the show now with Behind the Label, our look at the history, science, and people who make whiskey unique. As we celebrate International Women's Day this week, it's worth remembering Lafroig's legendary Bessie Williamson. She was just 24 years old when she landed on Islay for a temporary job taking shorthand at Lafroig back in 1934. She caught the attention of distillery owner Ian Hunter and wound up becoming his deputy. By 1944, she was managing the entire operation after Hunter had a stroke and brought the distillery back to life after World War II ended. In 1954, Ian Hunter died and left the distillery to Bessie. She was instrumental in building the reputation of Scotch whiskey around the world and eventually retired in 1971. She lived at the distillery until her death in 1982 at the age of 72, and she was a role model for many women now working in the whiskey industry. If you have something you'd like us to look at on an upcoming episode, just get in touch with us. That's all for this episode of WhiskyCast. You'll find links for the stories in this episode in our show notes at whiskycast.com. That's also where you'll find the latest whiskey news, my tasting notes, the calendar of events, the whiskey photo of the week, and of course a complete archive of past episodes going all the way back to 2005. Get in touch with us. Download the free WhiskyCast community app from your app store or find us on social media. We're on Blue Sky, X, Threads, Instagram, and Facebook at WhiskyCast, and our email address is comments@whiskycast.com.
Dewar's Double Double 38-year-old blended malt has arrived. and it's a true gem for collectors. Secure a bottle, and you'll be adding a rare piece of history to your collection.
WhiskyCast is a production of Cask Strength Media, copyright 2025, and comes to you from the charming, yet regrettably dry town of Haddonfield, New Jersey. I'm Mark Gillespie, reminding you that when you drink, please drink responsibly. Thanks for listening.